NPC.
Lights rock.
When you depend on me,
To give you
weapons and armor, information for your journey, and still you still shit and try to hurt me.
Lights stop.
When you're an NPC.
Lights rock.
Well, I suppose that it was time. For a show about role-playing games and tabletop gaming, I actually don't really focus on the major games out there. I mean, I certainly focus on World of Darkness and D&D for certain, but there's a lot of major RPG games out there that I really haven't touched on. There are two big ones that really come to my mind, one being Call of Cthulhu, and then the one that's really the topic today, which is the cyberpunk urban fantasy game Shadowrun. Yes, the true cyberpunk game. This was another one of the big-name games to come out in the late 80s into the early 90s, when the tabletop RPGs were still in its relative infancy, and really everything was on the table in terms of stories, ideas, as well as systems and so forth. This was before the World of Darkness line came out, and there was very little in the RPG world up until this point that really focused on any sort of modern setting, or, modern by 80s, 90s, 2000 standards, what have you. A lot of the things that were really being covered is D&D, high science fiction, things like that. So you had a lot of fantasy, you had a lot of really big science fiction where you're in starships and you're traveling to all these different worlds, but there was very little in the way of modern settings, or at least incorporating different elements into a modern setting that felt a little bit more relatable. Cyberpunk was a relatively untapped market in the RPG community at this point, and there was certainly an area for it. The idea of mixing low-life living with high-tech science fiction was appealing to a lot of people living through that time period. Add in the neon lights and the grime and grit of the city streets, and the looming capitalist hellscape of a political system made for some really compelling stuff. Movies like Blade Runner, RoboCop, and The Running Man really push this cyberpunk world-building desire as well. Shadowrun wasn't the only cyberpunk game to come out in this time. This was a time in the late 80s, early 90s when this concept was really being brought to the forefront. So you had a lot of interesting games out there. One of the most notable ones that came out a year before Shadowrun was Cyberpunk 2020, a RPG game that's still going strong to this day. However, Cyberpunk 2020 and its future installments have remained relatively niche and quiet, while Shadowrun has definitely been a much larger franchise. And I think that a really big part of that, one of the major reasons that sets Shadowrun apart from others, is mixing in urban fantasy as well as cyberpunk. The plot of Cyberpunk takes place in the distant future, sometimes in, the 20XX time, which has been updated as the years have gone on, so we don't have the running joke of the distant future of 2006. The story goes, in a grossly oversimplified version, that magic comes in essential waves like ebb and flow. What we experience over the past couple of centuries has been a period of extremely low magic. Suddenly, there is a spike, and the magic within all of us comes out. Some people remain human, but others become orcs, elves, dwarves, trolls, and so forth. This also coincides with the fact that dragons are also coming back out, and corporations are really taking over to create this true capitalist dystopia. States like France and the United Kingdom still exist, and of course Japan exists, as it does in any cyberpunk setting. You also have a huge amount of Native American states that have become way more emboldened after magic has reinvigorated them, able to take back the land that was taken from them from the European settlers. So, a lot of these states really exist, but they kind of exist more in like a civil servant sort of role. The true monopoly of violence belongs to corporations, and they can do whatever they want with relative impunity. As you can expect with that, you see a lot of massive booms in technology, especially mixing with magic. And then you also have a lot of income disparity, with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and the middle class being very much squeezed. Kind of reminds me of, something sort of similar right now. I'm just saying, I think we're like 10 neon signs away from a true cyberpunk dystopia. With a mix of back-alley cybernetic enhancements and the direct grime of the streets, mixed with the neon lights and the high skyscrapers of the upper class, Shadowrun is a story of D&D in the modern setting. The players are typically your salt-of-the-earth, lower-tier type of characters, either trying to build their way up in a group, being used by the Mr. Johnsons and the capitalist regimes of the world, or carving out their own niche in the streets. With a mix of magic, technology, cybernetics, cyberware, and intelligence, Shadowrun is a truly unique setting. So, long explanation made even longer, this franchise is currently on its 5th edition, just like most of the major franchises out there. It was actually the first one to really get its 5th edition out there, coming out in 2013. Whenever it was about 2012, 2013, I was working at the Origins Game Fair with a couple of friends of mine, volunteering and doing as you do. And with that, a lot of the people got these, which is the official Origins 2013 Special Edition, Where Gaming Begins edition of the Shadowrun. So I was able to get this about a solid 6 months or a year before it actually came out, thanks to a friend of mine getting these all handed out to them. And none of them really played Shadowrun, so they handed them all off to me. I got like 3 or 4 of these bad boys laying around somewhere. Here's 2 of them right now, but I definitely wanted to showcase the 5th edition one here to show off where the franchise is nowadays and the game that you're probably definitely going to pick up if you actually want to get into Shadowrun. I'm not familiar with every version of Shadowrun, tragically, so I can't exactly do a great compare and contrast of the Shadowrun games throughout the years as I could do with something like Dungeons & Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade. I do know there is a major difference between the 1st and 5th series, though, and there was a major change after the 4th edition came out. A lot of this has also changed for the better. Unlike D&D, that seems to try to reinvent itself with each edition, Shadowrun takes a similar cue from World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade, that it updates and enhances the past without changing too much of the source material. Once again, that is until 5th edition Vampire comes out, and for Shadowrun 4th edition comes out. The timeline usually gets altered a little bit so that it can match a little bit well with the time that we've already experienced and how it sort of moves forward in its alternate timeline. You also have to have a lot of updates when it comes to technology. Being a game that focuses on technology, you really have to find a way to update with the times as the editions go on. For instance, the first game for Shadowrun came out in 1989, before really anyone kind of truly understood the internet in a mass production sort of sense. Wouldn't be until about, 1997 and whatnot until the majority of people out there were actually getting involved with this internet stuff. So certainly after that becomes more apparent, you have to update Shadowrun to fit in with the internet. But beyond that, Shadowrun does typically remain the same. It's very cyberpunk, very urban fantasy, and there is a lot of customization when it comes to characters. I'll get into the system in a second, which can be a bit of a mixed bag. However, one of the staples of Cyberpunk and one of the best aspects of Shadowrun is the aspect of customization. The game plays a lot with the idea of cybernetics and what it means to be human, as well as the idea of modular weaponry. There are books upon books in the Shadowrun games that are dedicated solely to enhancements you can use on your character, weapons you can use, and ways in which you can hack into the web and databases, if you're a Decker. This is definitely one of the strongest points of Shadowrun, and for the few times that I've seen Shadowrun played, and the few times that I've experienced it, I've seen entire sessions where it is dedicated almost exclusively to the party opening up these massive, stacks of customization books that are purely just almost like a catalog where you pop open and you look at all of the interesting things you can add to your character. There are entire sessions dedicated to buying new weaponry, buying new gadgets and gizmos, hooking up with your cyberware and back alley doctors and whatnot. It's definitely one of the best aspects of Shadowrun is really customizing and maximizing your character. The game also encourages this as well, making it incredibly difficult for anyone who does not have some form of augmentation to succeed. There is also price and risk you pay when it comes to augmentation, as well as considering the fact that most of your dealings are not, probably in the best of medical situations. The reason being is Shadowrun very much is a class stratification sort of story. The wealthy got wealthier and wealthier, and they now hoard their wealth in these massive ivory tower skyscrapers, while the common folk live in the dirty, grimy city streets, just trying to scrape by. Most of the characters that you make in Shadowrun are those who are sometimes pawns to these, like, capitalist overlords, working for different corporations against other corporations, or maybe you're an anarchist trying to overthrow the system. Maybe you're just trying to dig your way out of the, hustle and bustle of the streets in any way you know how. Maybe you're trying to rule the streets, or maybe you're even trying to overthrow the system and take down the corporations, which more often than not leads in a very futile effort. The story of Shadowrun is a great one, that, as it speaks to a lot of what happens in the real world, keeping it relatable but extending it just out of the reach as to make sure that it feels still foreign and intriguing. If you add in the urban fantasy to it, having dwarves, elves, orcs, and trolls in the mix really adds to a unique setting that sets it apart from the rest of the cyberpunk themes out there. Customization and story is great and really is kind of the backbone of Shadowrun. And it's some of like the best stuff that I usually see out there. Just really knowing how to make your character stand out from the lot, changing up so many different things, and combining and contrasting like all these different pieces to make this great thing, and then having these great stories, which is really good because those really cover up the flaws that come with Shadowrun. And the major flaws that I see usually comes along with mechanics, especially dice mechanics. First off, and to hop on a little bit of a soapbox here, character creation and mechanics also involve simple multiplication and division in their equations, which will always be a turnoff to a lot of people. And yes, I know, this involves, I think it's HP, in which you actually just divide by 2. And I understand it's just dividing by 2, but you have no idea how the idea of division and multiplication can be such a barrier to new players coming in, especially those who only have really experienced D&D. I watch this happen anytime I've played a game, and the second that I say to someone working in character creation, alright, divide by, and I've already lost them, their eyes glaze over instantly as they just realize that whatever this is, it's just become too complicated because division and multiplication are involved. Granted, it's nowhere near leading edge. Like you never see a square root show up, but whenever you have those division and multiplications, it's just really funny to watch how many people just instantly shut off the second those words are uttered in character creation. And I mean just instantly just shuts off, and you have to dig your way out of a hole. Division and multiplication aside, the dice system is a skill-based D6 style system with thresholds built in. You combine the necessary skills and attributes to create a dice pool and roll for successes. Numbers of 5s and 6s equate to success, and it's more than half of your dice are rolled 1s, then you have a glitch, which is similar to a botch in other games. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, things start to get a little complicated whenever you add in the exploding dice mechanic, specialization, special dice pool, your modifications that can add and change different dice, changing things up like that. I mean, I've seen sometimes where people have legitimately rolled 36 dice in one roll. It's a dice system that is not very intuitive. It's something that takes a lot of time to really wrap your head around, which can usually be a problem whenever you have new players. You see those eyes gloss over, and it's really hard to kind of get them back invested in the story whenever they're just so confused at the concept of how they roll and what that roll actually means. There is also the slight other problem, a problem that I think I might make into its own video later, but I'll briefly discuss here, and that is the Decker Conundrum in Shadowrun. Now, I think that anyone who's played Shadowrun has experienced this conundrum at least once before, but the Decker Conundrum is whenever you have a Decker in your group and they have to plug in to this database or whatever, they have to hack a door, who knows. Usually that means setting several minutes where the storyteller and the Decker have their own little mini session while everybody else kind of sits in the wings and waits. for it to unfold. And now, granted, like, the 5th and 4th edition, from my knowledge, especially with 4th, but with 5th, seems to really try to counteract this problem, think of different ways you can involve other characters, but whenever you have several minutes set aside for one character in particular, you start to run into that main character problem that can start to feel very painful. It's the same problem I think that you would see if you had a bunch of non-Jedi and Jedi in a Star Wars game, where even though everybody's equal, you definitely get a feeling that someone is getting the most treatment. So where does this stack up in the long run of gaming? Well, I would say that Shadowrun stacks up pretty damn well. The system itself can be a bit challenging, and there's certainly some problems with it. However, it has definitely gotten better with later editions. The setting, customization, character creation, and story are some of the best out there, and some of the most original. And the mix of cyberpunk and urban fantasy makes it a unique and satisfying game experience. Shadowrun definitely gets a crit, and the 5th edition, in my opinion, is actually still the best of the franchise. That really simplified its mechanics, it really fixed a lot of problems with story, fixed problems that people have had in the past, and has really made Shadowrun a very, very fun experience moving forward. So, thank you all so much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more, become my patron on Patreon, and please come back soon for a new episode of Crit or Miss. Thank you all so much.